Childhood influences often lay the foundation for an individual's creative development, shaping their imagination and nurturing their artistic direction. Chris's father owned an architectural firm in Canada and sometimes worked at home. She was fascinated by the blueprints and enjoyed watching as he used different materials to construct his models. She had access to some of his drafting tools, and once she learned about perspective drawing, felt there was no limit to what she could draw. After graduation, Chris studied commercial art and was hired by an aerospace firm as a technical illustrator, lettering manual covers and drawing various airplane parts and schematic diagrams. Peter's father, a precision machinist from Germany, studied electronics at DeVry in Chicago and often brought projects home to share what he had learned. His father taught him how to machine metals with precision, encouraging Peter's interest in perfecting his technical skills. Peter attended a technical high school and later studied animation at Loyola University. For his independent study, he built an animation stand and a motion control camera. Peter and Chris met in 1978. They shared a mutual interest in stop-motion films and mechanical toys, and quickly began collaborating on different projects. Peter introduced Chris to Sculpey polymer clay. This butler figure was her first attempt. She believed the addition of the small plastic baby doll shoes added a special touch. Over time, Chris improved her sculpting skills, working with crepe hair and glass eyes, and started raiding the closet for costume materials instead of the sock drawer, and exploring other materials, including nylon stocking. During this time, she learned how to make plaster molds to cast liquid and foam latex for puppets. She enjoyed the mold-making process and found it relaxing and satisfying. These are a few early precision armatures that Peter designed and machined. They are highly durable and capable of enduring frequent repositioning for an animated puppet. The joints have to be tight enough to hold the puppet in off-balance positions. This is what gives the illusion of character to a stop-motion puppet. Opportunity came knocking at their door. Quite literally, a friend had recommended Peter to a local visual effects company, searching for someone to create a puppet for their commercial. The company provided the advertising agency's layouts, introducing Sherwin-Williams's new Dirt Fighter paint. The challenge was that Peter and Chris needed to have the Dutch boy puppet finished and delivered in just 3 days, which meant using a simple braided armature instead of a machined one. They took a tag team approach. One slept while the other worked. They sculpted and painted the head and shoes, sewed the clothes, and made the hat. After 3 grueling days, they finished the Dutch boy puppet and delivered him in time. This began a career for Peter as a model maker, creating special effects for national television commercials, as well as Chris and Peter's first collaborative doll.
Henry Waller hates that wall.
I hate that wall.
Because every time he paints that wall, it gets dirty again.
I hate that wall.
So Henry got Dirt Fighter from Dutch Boy. It's the new paint made for walls that get dirty again. Unlike most wall paints, Dirt Fighter keeps dirt right on the surface, so it cleans right off. Now Henry loves his wall.
I love my wall.
He loves his wall.
Get new Dirt Fighter for walls that get dirty again, and again, and again.
While visiting a newsstand, Peter and Chris discovered a magazine featuring artist-made dolls. They were unaware this art form existed. They were fascinated by the extraordinary detail and expressiveness of these fine art dolls and sought out every magazine. Inspired, they began to focus on creating their own style of artist-made dolls, using costumes and hairstyles to define and distinguish each character. They experimented with various art clays and techniques, continuously refining their craft. A magazine article covered a doll conference in Atlanta, where visiting artists could have their work critiqued by renowned NIADA artists. Peter and Chris decided to attend the conference, and each began creating a piece to bring. Chris made Hansel, a sitting figure, and Peter crafted the Sandman, a cam-driven automaton. Both were certain their pieces would be considered too weird for the art doll world. The critique was a nerve-wracking but invaluable experience, and with great relief and joy, their work was well received by the members. Peter and Chris were now members of NIADA and ready to get to work. They continued to use the armature Peter had designed for Hansel. Their characters and costuming became more detailed and elaborate, with Peter crafting the accessories, as well as handmade leather shoes. He later updated the sitting armature, adding posable arms. Chris creates dramatic hairdos for their figures. When creating characters, they want the hair texture and style to reflect the character's attitude, using a variety of materials, including wool crepe hair, mohair, horsehair, human and synthetic wig pieces, tassels, feathers, and natural fishing lures. Baby Palooza is a series of hand-cast resin figures created by Chris and Peter. The collection consists of 4 posable baby characters, individually costumed and adorned, showcasing their unique personalities. Zaftug Zelda's Bawdy Women Review is another resin series featuring a cast of burlesque-style cabaret characters. Each woman in the review has a unique story and is dressed in a costume that reflects her special talent. Peter and Chris enjoyed creating this series and intend to revisit the cabaret ladies in future projects. Here are more of Chris and Peter's cast resin series. These are titled Daydreamers, referencing their relaxed pose. The figures were made using wooden artist mannequins that Peter modified by adding brass pieces to the joints so they would hang loosely, resembling a stringless marionette. Additionally, he crafted butterfly chairs for the characters to recline in. Peter and Chris incorporated found objects into their art pieces when they came across decorative candlestick holders while shopping in a secondhand store. The discovery inspired them to use these items as pedestals for their figures. More treasures were found online: pewter bird legs and beautiful pheasant and rooster feathers, inspiring hybrid bird ladies. The sitting armatures evolved into standing, posable figures, some featuring braided wire joints. Peter designed these articulated, machined brass armatures, known as performers, for their ability to convey theatrical character through dramatic poses. This is Peter and Chris's first automaton, Cecil on overload. The armature is a modified artist mannequin with a hinged waist. He slowly rocks forward and back, powered by a wind-up music box mechanism. Emo is a 6.5-inch high automaton. The small-sized brass armature required a handmade spring for a spine. Peter made the motion controller from linked pennies connected to a wind-up music box mechanism, which creates a rhythmic side-to-side motion with alternating leg kicks. Monkeys have traditionally been a popular subject for automatons, as they embody a sense of fun and enchantment. Peter and Chris enjoy creating pieces that capture their whimsical nature particularly ones wearing a fez or a tutu. This simple automaton design produces a relatively complex action using one crankshaft and one control mechanism. It only takes one single revolution to create quite a bit of motion, which can be varied in speed depending on how fast the handle is turned. Peter's first servo-controlled automaton, named Hermes, was programmed with 3 servo mechanisms to control its movements. A small servo inside the head controls the left-right rotation. The 2 servos mounted on the board control the rods that push and pull the neck joint, moving the head forward and back and tilting side to side. Peter favors using servo mechanisms because of their high accuracy in controlling positions and the ability to reprogram and save the automaton's movements in the servo memory chips. Hermes is a frightened character observing what is going on outside of his hermetically sealed chamber. Slowly looking side to side, he observes the world outside his protective bubble, pausing at various intervals to assess any potential threat. His hands are pressed against the glass dome, hoping it can shield him from danger. Peter continued experimenting with servo electronics to animate figurative sculptures in a lifelike manner. He combined the hand-crank monkey automaton's side-to-side rocking motion and leg kicks with the servo head movements of Hermes. The outcome was the kicking guy, featuring a programmable 4-channel servo-controlled mechanism with a counterbalanced spring armature to enhance its natural movement. Peter created his first cam-operated mechanism, the Sandman, in 1994 and decided to revisit this clockwork movement. He built an automated pen plotter that traced the programmed servo movements onto the wooden cams. Brass levers follow the shape of the 5 wooden cam discs and push or pull the rods of the internal mechanism, producing clockwork movements of the head and arms. The machined brass mechanism for Auguste is encased in Warbla, a thermoplastic molded shell used to protect the moving parts and to shape the costume. Peter and Chris found the cam-operated mechanism movements too limited. Therefore, they plan to convert Auguste into a servo-controlled automaton in the future. Dr. Mesmer was Peter's most complex electronic automaton, using a 6-channel servo controller to program the movements. The hollow resin head contains a servo with a full range of motion, up, down, forward, back, and rotation. The servos, rods, and springs mounted on Dr. Mesmer's body act as muscles to produce the head movements. Both arms are machined brass armatures with loose hinge joints, allowing for passive motion. The right arm is attached to a rotating hand crank, generating arm movement and spinning the hypnodisc. The left arm is connected to a lever that operates with a push-pull motion, controlling the pulsating light effects. These electronic controls manage the pulsating light effects of the hypnomachine and the spinning hypnodisc. Dr. Mesmer initially required a connection to a portable CD player to play back the program. This was recently upgraded to a built-in micro USB servo controller to run independently. Mad scientist Dr. Mesmer moves his head side to side as he observes his audience. He looks down on the hypnomachine, slowly pushing and pulling the lever, causing the lights on the hypnomachine to begin pulsating, while he simultaneously turns the hand crank, causing the hypnodisc to spin. The lever and spinning disc motion speeds up. The pulsating light sequence quickens, and the hypnodisc spins faster as Dr. Mesmer looks over the crowd in an attempt to hypnotize his unwitting victims. Over the years, Chris has transitioned through various sculpting mediums since she was introduced to oven-baked polymer clays. She started with Sculpey, then moved to Cernit, and later to epoxy clay, and is currently using virtual clay as her sculpting medium. In 2015, Peter and Chris purchased a 3D printer to make automaton parts and skull armatures for sculpting heads in epoxy clay. The switch to 3D sculpting occurred when Chris acquired ZBrushcore modeling software. When Chris applied her sculpting techniques, she discovered that the virtual clay responded naturally when manipulated to create wrinkles and facial expressions, with the added benefit of perfectly matching ears. Each head is sculpted as a full model, so they can be used in any of Peter and Chris's projects, either as one-of-a-kind figures, automatons, or scaled down and modified into pins. The ribbed surface of the 3D printing process is intentionally left untouched in certain areas to simulate hair texture or create the impression of wood grain on the ventriloquist puppet. Pretty Polly is a fully 3D printed automaton. Her gentle side-to-side motion is produced by a 3D printed rocker part designed by Chris, connected to nylon cables. The movement is driven by a gear motor and batteries. The need for hollow heads was a key reason Peter and Chris transitioned to 3D printing. For proper balance, automaton heads must be light and hollow. Previously, Chris would sculpt the head in epoxy clay, create a silicone mold, and then use Peter's custom rotocaster to produce a hollow resin head. However, since they make one-of-a-kind automatons, this process was costly and time-consuming. Now they can 3D print a hollow head to any specification, streamlining the process. This is the 3D sculpted head of the Alexander automaton. The green area indicates where the model has been hollowed out, creating a shell. The final head and hands were 3D printed, primed, and painted. Peter and Chris discovered that another benefit of 3D printing is the ability to create accessories for their figures, like an ornate vanity mirror or royal crowns, suitable for the king and queen. The 2024 NIADA Dragon-themed fundraiser auction was an opportunity to discover new materials. Chris created Dragon Mother Echidna for this project, using specialty 3D printing materials, like an iridescent blue to purple, color-changing PLA filament for her lower serpent body. Echidna's wings were printed in clear resin and tinted with transparent UV resin dyes to maintain their translucent appearance. The dragon crown was printed using black LCD resin and finished with tried-and-true rub and buff for an antique metallic effect. Presenting the finished figure, Echidna, the mother of dragons. Peter and Chris's interest in technology significantly enhances their artistic process. Influenced by their childhood experiences, they naturally gravitate towards using technical tools, especially when these tools integrate with creative projects. Their latest venture involves using Curie Engine, a 3D scanning app, to create digital archives of their early work. This also allows them to revise the original sculptures or produce scaled versions. Excited about how digital scanning will enhance their artwork, Peter and Chris look forward to exploring new avenues in their figurative art and automata.